Welcome. My name is Curleen Jean-Louis, and I serve as Vice Chair of the Solo Small Firm and General Practice Division's Diversity Board. Today's webinar, The Brain Behind Bias, Harnessing Neuroscience to Transform Bias into Awareness, Justice, and Resilience, is part of the division's Activate Diversity webinar series. This series was launched by the Diversity Board in 2020 to promote awareness surrounding the unique issues confronting underrepresented and marginalized communities in the U.S., and to challenge attorneys to take actionable steps towards creating a more inclusive society. As you learn more about bias and its impact through today's program, we'd like to challenge you to consider ways in which you can use bias as a tool for change and encourage you to share how you will activate diversity at the close of the program. At this time, I would like to give the floor to the chair of the division, Mel Shaw, for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Curleen. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mel Shaw. It is my pleasure to serve as chair of the ABA General Practice Solo and Small Firm Division for 2025-2026. It is also my pleasure to welcome you to today's program on the brain behind bias, and also to thank you for being not only members of the ABA, but also members of the GP Solo division. If you're not a member of the GP Solo division, which is the home of solo small firm practitioners, we invite you to become a member by going to the ABA website because membership is free. This program is provided to you as one of your many benefits of being an ABA member and GP Solo. I also want to recognize very briefly our organizers today. I want to thank Shonté, Jovan Taylor for moderating this program today. This is the second time she's presented on neuroscience for us as a division, but I also want to thank Judge Benis Aldana and Curleen Jean-Louis for helping organize this program, and for our diversity fellows, Michelle Mapp and Pamela Harper Hall for moderating. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Mel, for that warm welcome and for your leadership of the ABA GP Solo Division. As chair of the Diversity Board, I am very pleased to add my welcome to today's program. This webinar is an important continuation of the conversation we began last fall, and it moves that discussion forward in a particularly practical and thoughtful way. In the legal profession, where clear thinking, ethical judgment, and emotional steadiness matter so much, bias can be amplified by stress, conflict, and the demands of high-pressure environments. That reality makes this conversation especially timely and important. What is so compelling about today's program is that it encourages us to think about bias not simply as a problem to be addressed, but as an opportunity for greater self-awareness, stronger resilience, better professional relationships, and ultimately a more just and inclusive profession. I want to also add my sincere thanks to our speaker, Shonté Taylor, for sharing her expertise with us today. Also thank our moderators, Pamela Harper Hall, Michelle Mapp, two of our diversity fellows this year, for helping guide this important discussion. And a very special thank you to the Vice Chair of the Diversity Board, Curleen Jean-Louis, for her leadership in spearheading the webinar series and helping these meaningful programs to life. Thank you all for joining us. We're delighted to have you with us, and I hope you find today's program insightful, practical, and empowering.
Thank you, Chair Shaw and Chair Aldana, for your remarks. Your presence here today underscores the division and the board's commitment to diversity, and we thank you. We are excited today for the opportunity to present the law firm sponsor for this program. This Activate Diversity Series program has a sponsor, the Law Offices of Joan M. Swartz. The law offices of Joan M. Swartz, we appreciate your sponsorship for today's program. It's evidence of your commitment to diversity, not just in word, but also in deed, and we're grateful for your generous support. Attorney Joan M. Swartz of the Law Offices of Joan M. Swartz has been providing her clients with thoughtful and strategic legal counsel since 1987. She opened her own firm, the Law Offices of Joan M. Swartz, in 2000, where she now focuses her practice on matters relating to employment law and sexual harassment claims. Joan proudly serves clients throughout the St. Louis metropolitan area, including St. Louis County and St. Charles County, Missouri, as well as St. Clair County. And we'll pass it to Joan now for a few words.
Hi, and I'd like to welcome everyone here. I have a special interest in this particular topic because I have to talk about it a lot with my clients. we talk about bias. If I can learn just a little bit more about this and how I can serve them better, I think I'm well served by listening. And I'm hoping I can turn this into action as Judge Aldana has challenged us. So here we go.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you for your generous sponsorship of today's program. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our program moderators for today. As Chair Shaw mentioned, they are two of our current diversity fellows, Pamela Harper Hall, and Michelle Mapp. Pamela Harper Hall is a sole practitioner whose practice consists of estate planning, mediation, family law, and other civil matters. She is also a licensed title agent and conducts both residential and commercial closings. Notably, Mrs. Harper Hall is the first African-American justice and the first African-American judge in Evangeline Parish, Louisiana. We also have Michelle A. Mapp, who is also a sole practitioner based in North Charleston, South Carolina, where she provides legal services in estate planning, probate, heirs property, real estate, small business, nonprofit, and contract law. With more than 30 years of experience spanning nonprofit, government, education, and private sectors, her work is grounded in a commitment to helping individuals, families, and communities build, protect, and preserve generational wealth. We're so glad to hand them, and we're so glad to have them, and the program's now in your hands.
Good afternoon, everyone. Why the brain behind bias? Today's webinar is important because attorneys work in high-pressure environments where clarity, emotional control, and ethical decision-making are essential. Bias, your own, others, and the system's, interacts with stress, fatigue, and conflict in ways that affect your effectiveness, interactions, mental state, and judgment. Bias carries a negative connotation, so it is often experienced as a threat to learn, confront, or understand. Yet, reframing what bias truly is and how the brain creates it is not just important, but essential for navigating bias at every level, both external and internal. The brain behind bias explores how understanding the neuroscience of bias can transform it into a powerful tool for awareness, resilience, and justice. When we shift from shame and blame to understanding, we gain the clarity and regulation needed to address bias with accuracy, accountability, and humanity. Understanding and transforming bias through neuroscience is not about dismissing its existence, but leveraging bias for growth and justice. To you, Pamela.
Thank you, Michelle. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker. Good afternoon, everyone. Shonté Jovan Taylor has a Master of Science and she's a PhD candidate. She's a neuroscientist, educator, and human potential strategist who has spent over 15 years translating complex brain science into tools that support clarity, resilience, equity, and ethical leadership. As one of the few Black women in neuroscience, she blends scientific expertise with lived experience, cultural intelligence, and a commitment to justice-centered advocacy. Her mission is to help professionals use the power of their brain to think, feel, and lead with greater awareness, compassion, and impact. Shonté Jovan Taylor is also founder of the Optimind Institute. The Optimind Institute is a neuroscience-based education and leadership organization that equips individuals and organizations with brain-based tools for emotional regulation, decision-making, bias awareness, and human-centered leadership. Through keynotes, trainings, coaching, and certification programs, Optimind integrates science plus strategy plus story to support meaningful, sustainable transformation. Shonté's mission is to ethically empower 1 billion minds by democratizing neuroscience, elevating human potential, and advancing justice through awareness, regulation, and resilient decision-making. I introduce to you our speaker, Shonté Jovan Taylor.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Pamela, and thank you to the American Bar Association, particularly the diversity division. And thank you to the sponsor as well. And of course, to all of you attendees. I really value your time. So I want to make sure that we cover as many of these slides as possible. I want to just note that the first presentation I did in the fall centered more around wellness and navigating this bias atmosphere while keeping our wits about us, keeping our stress levels down. But this one is integrating how bias guides our diversity drive. Okay, so I upgraded it, if you will. So the brain behind bias, harnessing neuroscience to transform bias into awareness, resilience, justice, and diversity. We can add that now. I want to start with a quote, which is me saying it. To be biased is to be human. The work, your work, is not to become unbiased. It's to become fair, even when your brain is in conflict with the facts. Okay, I'm going to repeat that again later, but I wanted you to have that theme running into through your brain. So when I thought about upgrading this presentation, which still includes the wellness piece, how to navigate bias and everything that's going on in this era, I knew I needed to enhance it with the idea of diversity. So we need to rethink diversity and bias in this era. So how we navigate and activate diversity in this era of DEI attacks and minimalization is going to be very important. Now, I consciously decided not to be in the direct niche of DEI training because I knew I would be asked to do it, just like women's training, neuroscience behind women's brain. I do all kind of training because the brain deals with everything and everybody. And so it wasn't my default niche. But one of the reasons I intentionally did not have a DEI niche is because I was able to see that DEI model over time was not moving the needle significantly. And we could see this from the data and the stats of who is in those top CEO positions, executive positions. I mean, we can map this. There's loads of data around the composition of organizations and companies. And even when we talk about social justice organizations, when we talk about crime and criminality and prison systems, we have the data on why there's still bias in a lot of these regions. And so I knew we needed a different level of discussing diversity, and I knew neuroscience was the key to that. And so we, at this era, they say history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, right? We have been in this position before where, there's a lot of bias and isms in these organizations and in governments that directly affect us. But it's not the same because we had a taste of what it is like to move the needle forward. But now it seems to be some backtracking. And so I say that history is rhyming right now. So we have to rethink how we navigate bias and diversity. So I had to change up the learning objectives for today as well. And I want you to be able to recognize the hidden layers of bias across the individual, organizational, and neural levels. And I'm going to associate it with some science and biology as well, because even the loss of one diverse voice can destabilize teams and decisions. And that is parallel in biological systems as well. Pamela mentioned that I have a master's in biology with the emphasis on neurobiology. So I had to take a lot of species and animal related science as well, and see the delicacy of ecosystems, which I then linked to what we're going to discuss today. I also want you to understand that bias, it's at the brain level and it's science backed, and there's tools to navigate what leads to stress due to bias, what leads to bias reactions, what leads to assumptions and adversely making decisions that affects people's dynamics, their mood, their careers. I also want you to be able to differentiate between a bias-driven response and regulation of that, understanding values-aligned decision-making under stress, and how unchecked reactions can actively suppress your cognitive diversity systems as well in your body and your brain, and help you to drive more insights, creativity, and performance, as well as imagination. Your insights and your imagination are going to be very important during this time, because like I said, history is rhyming, right? So there is some overlap, but relatively we are in uncharted territory. So we need more imagination, more insights to navigate, and sometimes in real time, biases and how to drive more diversity in the moment. I also want you to be able to integrate some of these neuroscience-backed strategies, ideas, and concepts that I will be sharing today. Now, there is a additional handout that I created from the last presentation. However, that will need to be updated with some of this diversity training that I will be sharing today as well. So, Curly, make sure I don't forget. And finally, I want you to be able to transform, because you can have the understanding, you can have the awareness, you can be able to differentiate, which I know lawyers are good at, and integrating these strategies. But then we have to transform ourselves, transform our organizations, and ultimately we're going to have to transform these systems. So the acronym for you to remember is ROOTED, and I want you to be able to recall it easily so you could be rooted in diversity concepts and strategies as well. My teaching background, I'm always thinking, okay, how can I make stuff stick? Okay, so I love training and making sure adult brains are learning effectively. All right, so I use the analogy. I love analogies, so you get a few. Beneath diversity, beneath bias is awareness. And if we are going to be able to recognize the depths of bias and diversity, we have to be aware of what drives them, why they show up. And once we have this awareness, then we can take the next steps to lead to the ultimate transformation. So think of bias as an iceberg. I'm going to ask the moderator to read some responses to this question. I also asked a lot of questions. When you think of an iceberg, what automatic associations come to you when you think of an iceberg? Any response is fine.
I immediately thought about the Titanic.
Doesn't it kind of feel like we're on the Titanic? No. But with awareness, and when people are listening to each other, right? Instead of other biases or assumptions that drive other people, we do have an opportunity not to end up like the fate of the Titanic. Okay. All right. Anybody else have a different answer than Titanic? Anything come up?
Yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that someone said more underneath than on the top.
Yes. So this is literally, an iceberg is literally just the tip of the iceberg, right? So there's so much more we can do and really haven't done as a collective society to really ensure that we move the needle in a significant way. Okay, because in 2025, if we still need DEI trainings and the composition of organizations is relatively the same, well, we need to get under that iceberg a little bit more. And that is where neuroscience comes in, from my biased viewpoint, by the way. Biased on neuroscience. Okay, so most organizations either ignore the depth or they don't even know it exists. And so we're operating at a surface level of both diversity and inclusiveness, right? We are operating at the surface level of biases. And that is not to, degrade what has, been accomplished so far. But if we go deeper levels, we'll be able to see a different level of transformation, right? It's kind of like a novice golfer versus someone who gets out there every day and they get a coach, and you can, there's levels to learning and expanding yourself and getting more keen and expert at what you're doing. So in order to get to the hidden layers, we need a deeper kind of insight and a different kind of knowledge, people. And so we'll be addressing those. So why does neuroscience matter? Understanding the mechanics of bias promotes effective change and resilience. And so every change, every behavioral change, there is a level of physiological changes going on at the brain level, but people don't really make that connection. And so we're going to make the connection, because if it doesn't change at the long-term brain level, the level of neural pathways, then it's not sustainable. It won't last. It's kind of like trying to pick up a new habit. Well, if you don't keep, practicing that habit and establishing new tracks for that new habit, that new neural pathways, they will eventually start to dissolve again, and you'll default to your old habit, if it was there in the first place. So we have to make sure that we are connecting behavior and outcomes of behaviors and decisions all the way to biology, neurobiology. And also, when I talk about resilience, and I know, there's it's like a spectrum. People think of resilience in different ways. Some people think it's more negative and it's burnout. But when I talk about resilience, I'm talking about from the level of the brain, to be able to encounter stressors and have the bounce back neurologically in your brain cells, but even bounce back better, faster, and with probably more insights in some cases. And so we need to be resilient at the physical brain level and at the emotional brain level. And so there's a different type of vocabulary I want you to expand yourself on when you are thinking of these words that you are familiar with. But sometimes when we hear something over and over again, it kind of loses its power, right? And so I want to empower words you already understand and give you a different perspective, a different insight into them, so that it will inspire and motivate you to and reinvigorate you to use these words and practice these mechanisms. And this is important, especially during this time, because of so many things that are happening that are attacking laws that have to do with diversity. And we have to make sure that we are staying the course, because there can be low morale. There probably is low morale on a lot of levels. And I'm sure you're seeing this as well. But people of justice, who are so important for this time, Lady Justice needs you regulated and resilient to continue your work that's important on continued advocacy and protecting the rule of law. Okay, because without regulation, without resilience, it's going to be really hard to sustain all of the engineered chaos and overwhelm that's happening today in this era. All right, so we all know that most DEI trainings, most diversity trainings, they focus on either the external and or the internal. And so I'm an and person. Okay, we need ways to focus on organizational bias at the systemic level, at the policy level. But we also have to work on our biases at the individual level. Yes, check, organizations. And we need to go further than that because, like I said earlier, the bias trainings, the diversity trainings haven't moved the needle significantly in the last 40 years, just to give a number to it. And we already see that there is some retrogression in those policies, in those decisions, in those even laws. Okay, we can't even use the word women in grants anymore when it comes to government grants. So that just goes to show that's a demonstration of the backward ways we're going. I did a keynote for the Silicon Valley STEM for girls last year. And one of the things I pointed out was the World Economic Forum in 2019, I believe, they predicted that, matter of fact, let me have people guess, like I did the audience there. How long do you think it's going to take for women to have financial equity and professional equity? This is for the attendees too, if they have access to asking questions. I'm curious, how many years do you think it'll take for women to reach equity economically, professionally? Anyone? Moderators, you could jump into.
I see someone put 60 years.
Okay.
Someone else put 2 generations or more.
Okay. One more.
Let's see. I'm thinking maybe the same 2 generations or more.
Okay. So what would you estimate 2 generations to be?
40 years.
40 years.
I look at a generation as 20 years.
Okay. Let's say they reported it would be 257 years before women can reach economic and professional equity in these American streets. So just consider that. And that was last year. That was in February when I presented that. And so a lot has happened over the last year. And even while I was saying it in real time, I knew that number was wrong now, because there is an attack on issues related to women being elevated. So it's going to be a setback, even more so than 250 years, maybe. And that's why this training is important, and other similar trainings to it, and the work that you all do. All right. So organizations have been dealing on the surface level, lots of money being thrown at trainings, right? But we still have the same problems, and we're going backwards. So we have to address the hidden layers, and we have to do it at the organizational level, the individual level, but I'm introducing another level, the neurophysiological level, okay? Because we have to know what we're not dealing with. We have to deal with the iceberg under what's not being dealt with. And so we have to deal with the mental, emotional, and physiological layers of that iceberg that influences our perceptions and our actions unconsciously. You know, we're not aware of it. And so that's where the rubber will meet the road. So we need to understand the ripples of bias, because it has an effect on everything that we do and everything that we don't do, what we don't say, what we say, what we try to consciously suppress, because neuroscience says even when you try to suppress what you want to say, what you need to say, people can still pick up on micro movements and know that something is still off with what you are trying to not convey. And so we're impacting other people's brains, whether we want to or not. So we have to clear up some things within ourselves. So when we're stressed, when we are upset because of witnessing bias or experiencing biases, we are still affecting other people if we stay in those states. Okay, so we think we're in isolation dealing with bias, but we're not. We're all connected. Okay, so your stress responses can be picked up by others. And your stress responses, not only do they do physiological damage within you chronically, that's a whole different training, but it also influences your behaviors, your decisions. And so we have to really grapple with, do we want to hold on to bias? Do we want to not navigate it more powerfully? Because if we don't, it will affect us anyways. It will reflect our ability to have sustainable energy, to be able to have focus, to be able to make decisions that are not biased. It will determine if we can stay respectful in a conversation or not, or take things the wrong way. Okay, stress is multivariable, has multiple ways. So being able to understand and navigate your nervous system in your stressful states is crucial during this moment, because bias inherently, and I think it was Pamela who said, or it may have been Michelle, I don't know, saying that bias has a negative connotation to it regardless, right? And so one of the ways that I train on bias is, I neutralize it for everyone, because it doesn't have to be, it's not necessarily bias, right? We attach the negativity to it because that's how it's used in this culture, okay? And so neuroscience matters because it will help us to understand bias at the deepest levels of our biology, and it will help to retrain our nervous systems, and it will produce more psychological safety within ourselves and others, okay? Because remember, we're connected. And ultimately, it allows us to be on this journey to advocate for others and stand up for others without burning ourselves out or being staying in a state of threat or anger. We can transform that energy. All right, so now I'm going to flash some pictures, and I just want you to associate whatever you're going to associate with them. And I'll come back to these. You don't have to necessarily write it down. You can type it in if you want to, but I'm going to come back to these. So the iceberg again, what are your associations? Especially since now I talked about some of it. If you have children or nieces or grandchildren, you might recognize these two from Finding Nemo. Okay, what are your associations? And then what are your associations with the ocean, with waves, with water, swimming? And then what are your associations with martial arts? I'll come back to those. All right. So if we're going to move the needle forward significantly these next 50 years, 2 generations, we need an ultimate bias toolbox, okay? That needs to address multiple levels of that iceberg, okay? And mostly I'm focused on the neurophysiological aspect or levels of addressing bias, which I believe is a huge missing piece to addressing bias and promoting more diversity. All right, so bias Once again, affects our minds, our emotions, and bodies. So we have to deal with it at the level of the individual, which trainings will do, right? But there's another level of the individual level, which is the neurophysiology level, okay? So let me give you an example of a strategy, and there's tons of strategies in that handout that was given for the first part of this presentation. I like examples. So an example of a neurophysiological strategy would be reframing. Let's keep it simple, people, okay? So reframing is seeing something in a different light, okay, essentially. So I reframe bias, right? The brain behind bias isn't broken. It's not necessarily negative. It's efficiency, because our brains don't want to use up a lot of energy. It's very conservative when it comes to using energy for thinking and doing and being and saying the things and thinking critically, okay, and making decisions. So it prioritizes how much it wants to do activities or thinking or making decisions based on if the neural tracks are already there and they could just run that track easily. It's more efficient, less energy to use, versus, oh no, we need to learn this. We need to say this. We need to think more on this and write more on this or consult with other people. All of that takes mental energy. But our brains run mostly on those already established neural pathways that we call bias pathways, okay? We are biased when it comes to who we love, right? What we like, what kind of cereals we like at the store, what kind of fruit, what kind of corner store we like to go to and shop at. Those are all biases. They're decisions, really. And if we didn't have biases early on, we would exhaust ourselves by the time we walked out of our front door, because we would have to learn what we prefer over and over again. It would be exhausting to go to the store and learn what cereal we prefer. We would have to read the ingredients again, look at the different products and the brands. We have to rethink or make a decision. Do I like this person? Yes, that's my mom. That's my dad. That's my brother. That's my sibling. So they are shortcuts to getting to know the world and understand the world, really, to survive and to thrive eventually. Okay. And so to me, I like to reframe the word bias as preference. We have preferences for things. Okay. And it's only culture that has skewed it towards more negative. So we have to think about, how are we going to repurpose these words, reuse these words in this proper context? Some words will need to be rebranded. Okay. And so reframing is a neurophysiological strategy, because once you're able to reframe what bias is, you kind of could take a breath. Like, okay, we're all biased then. I mean, we would be exhausted if we didn't have some biases, right? But there's a fork in the road where bias went awry. So let's deal with it in that context, shall we? But I want you to remember, once again, to be biased is to be human. We are humans, therefore we are biased, point blank, period, okay? We got to etch this in people's heads. We have to etch it in anybody we influence, and they have to deal with this and navigate this. We have to neutralize it and put it in context and have some more understanding around it, because one thing that I witnessed is that when people are forced into bias trainings, normally it's because of something that happened, okay? And organization trying to, there's a lag, basically. They weren't proactive, they're reactive, okay? And a lot of people feel forced into those trainings. So their brain is already shut down for learning. So they can attend 2 weeks of training, but not much will seep in if they chose not to be there, or if they think they are there because of them. You know how people make it about themselves sometimes, right? It's like, I'm not biased. It's almost akin to, I'm not racist, right? I'm not sexist. It's all in the same kind of, it has the same kind of energy, right? But we can distinguish between bias and racist, right? Or bias and sexist, right? So bias can be a neutral term. And if we want people to really understand it and navigate it and promote it, we have to dismantle the negative kind of, the automatic negative connotation, which is also a kind of bias, right? And bias of how people are biased of how bias is talked about. Okay, so to be biased is to be human. The work is not to become unbiased. That's a reframe again. It's to become fair, even when your bias shows up. It's to become fair, even when your brain is in conflict with the facts. It's about becoming fair because we all have biases. I need that to sink, people. I need it to land. Now, fairness is a key component of what you all do. Fairness, justice, right? So this is really important. And when we are children, we inherently know when our brother or sister got more juice than us, right? We say what? That's not fair. So it is innate for us to feel fairness or unfairness. So this is not something that is learned. It is biological. It is instinctive to know when someone has a bigger portion of something or is getting more attention on something. We understand inherently when there are inequities and inequalities. We're just grown-up people with grown-up situations that, we're trying to navigate to on a more adult level. So once we address our biases, then we can be guided to drive more diversity. Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about next. So there's a lot of words on here. You will have the slides, I'm assuming, or on demand. I just want to emphasize we need to go from the old way of thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I like to say all of the words, to a neuroscience-based or activated form of diversity. Okay, so what an example of what that looks like is we see diversity as a moral obligation. Really, it's a fairness obligation. Okay, but a neuroscience framework, you would reframe it and say diversity is more about cognitive performance strategy. Like, we're better people, we're stronger people, we're smarter people when we have more diversity. Okay, another example, old diversity, equity, and inclusion and abilities. They want to eliminate the bias. What am I telling you? That's not the goal. We're not trying to eliminate bias. That's impossible. Good luck if you think that's going to happen. You see how organizations, the foundation was wrong. We're not eliminating. Okay, we are figuring out. First of all, we need to understand that we all have them. It's biological, it's innate, and somewhere down the line, it became tainted and produced all these outcomes, these negative outcomes. And we also need to know that when we regulate our biases, when things come up for us, there are tools to help us navigate our biases better so that we can become fairer. Okay, when to become aware of when we need to regulate, right? Even when it doesn't feel good, even when it conflicts with our own biases. All right, so you can read the rest of this a little later. So let's talk about diversity. Let's neutralize it again, because I understand skepticism. well, it is still negative and producing other outcomes. This is not you all saying that. This is things I heard over the decade, right? Nature already solved the problem of diversity a long time ago, people. Okay, we're the ones behind by billions of years. Okay, diversity in in biology and ecosystems are a great thing. Removing even one species can destabilize the whole ecosystem. Okay, one natural disaster that wipes out a species or two, whole ecosystem messed up, even down to the level of a tree falling in the forest and separating species from its original pathways of getting food or finding mates, down to that level. I'm talking like flower species, or bugs or beetles, things of that nature. And so think about that as I'm talking about diversity as well. Now, when it comes to us lagging behind, we know there's tons of research, and I'll share a couple later, where we thrive. We were able to thrive, survive, and thrive because our collective human intelligence, our social interactions collectively allowed us to survive longer and eventually thrive. We are inherently social beings. We don't do well individually. That's why there's this whole thing about loneliness. Yes, I know it's just being talked about now and in certain contexts. That's another conversation. But loneliness has always been something that decreases mood and increases stress. One of the roles I had as a clinical neuroscientist was assessing people with dementia. And a lot of times they did not have a lot of social interactions. And so one of the interventions was to tell their caregiver to put them in some kind of senior daycare so that they can have interactions, play games, dance. Sometimes people come in and dance or do shows, magic shows, all of that. But that is engaging their social neural circuitries in their brain to ward off not just loneliness, but their dementia, or level it out so it doesn't keep decreasing. Their cognitive abilities won't keep decreasing if you elevate certain parts of their neural networks, which is being social. Okay. And so when people talk about diversity, you all will now know that if they're talking about it from the lens of being negative, however they say it negatively, I'm not going to get into that. They're talking from a place of ignorance. I'm just going to say it because there's too much information nowadays to not study things and learn things. So when you think about diversity, you can now link it to, no, this is how we move. This is how every living creature or species survives and thrives. It's through diversity. And even one species, even one voice taken out of the collective will cause a ripple effect. You see where I'm going with this? So now we can be more empowered, we can be more confident, push our shoulders back when we talk about diversity, because you now know it on a biological systemic level, both with other species and our own species. Okay. When we think about, and I'm going to switch over because I keep going. When we think about our collective social intelligence to survive, think about what that looked like at different periods. That means there's more people to watch for threats, right? More eyeballs, more ears that can listen out for threats. More people can take care of one another's children so somebody can sleep or people can hunt, right? And so try doing that alone in different areas, right? It's going to be harder to survive, definitely harder to thrive. So nothing has changed except for what? Our psychology, our perceptions of others. And some people is driving that division and has an individualistic mindset, a homogeneous mindset versus a collective diverse mindset, which is really our natural state of being to thrive. I know I like to hone in on things. I'm a teacher by nature, people. Okay, so research shows this. There was in 2001 Harvard Business Review. I keep this study close to my heart because it showed that when we have diverse teams, there's more innovation, more creativity, more solutions that are found. And another finding, a major finding was when there are more women on the team, all these outcomes, positive outcomes also they saw multiple parameters. And I'll share a bit about that later. Let me drive home this diversity when it comes to populations, because I really want it to sink deep, because I don't know when's the next time I'm going to have you all in these webinar streets. So let's neutralize it some more, diversity, okay? Because we're going to talk about animals, okay? When the wolves of the Yellowstone, the population went down, there's a law in physics: for every force, there's an equal and opposite force, right? And so if something goes down, something else is going to go up, right? So the wolves of the Yellowstone area, the population decreased significantly, which increased the population of deer. So they started overpopulating, which deer eat what? They eat greenery, right? And so they're eating up, they're messing up the ecosystem, right? And so it's reducing the amount of water that can be absorbed. So now there's flooding, right? And if there's flooding and the riverbanks are overwatered, you're messing up the chemistry of the water. And so that's going to impact water life, fishing. You see where I'm going with this? So I help people really to connect the dots on things. That's like I feel like one of my superpowers. And neuroscience expedites my ability to do that. And I'm happy to do that for other people. But I want people to be able to connect the dots. This is the deeper layers that we're missing when it comes to evolving to the next phase of our humanity, to our being, okay? The bee population, okay? We know the importance of bees. And the bees are being attacked right now as well with the pesticides and the GMOs and all of that. So what happens when the bee population decreases? Something else is going to be an effect. It's called our food. And not just our food. They pollinate flowers, right? And that's part of the ecosystem, right? There are species. You see, we're all connected. The Irish potato famine. There wasn't diversity in the strain of the potato. It was homogeneous. And so if there's not diversity in the types of potatoes, and one invasive virus or bacteria can go in there and attack the genes of that one species of potato, then that wipes out the potato crop. And that affects people's ability to eat. But if you have multiple types, a diverse, if you will, the D word, diversity of potatoes, then one crop being wiped out yes, it may shift the dynamics of food, potato options, but at least there's still some potatoes. You see where I'm going with this? All right. Before I continue, are there any comments, questions, clarifications?
So Shonté, I have a question.
Yes.
So you shared a very daunting fact with us about the 250 years before women catch up, if you will. And I think someone in the comments said, sadly, they think it's never going to happen. And so my question is, how do we not internalize negative statistics to create, I think, sort of a bias within us when we hear things like that that seem very depressing or daunting? It seems like it can have sort of, you said bias is human, so it feels like it creates a natural bias, if you will.
That's an excellent question. So that is the importance of addressing bias at the neurophysiological level, because just like the example I gave about the reframe, when you reframe, neuroscience shows us in the brain that your what's called the amygdala, that threat part of the brain, that fear part of the brain gets less activated. So it decreases in its activation when you just reframe something. And so if there's less activation in that part of your brain, that means your cortisol is also going to decrease. Remember, there's always a reaction, right? If something goes down, something else goes up. So in the point of the reframe, the activation of the amygdala goes down, right? Because you're reframing, but your cortisol, it also goes down, but your blood flow goes up to your prefrontal cortex, which was not as active because you had amygdala hijack that reversed that blood flow. So if you have more blood flow in the most advanced part of the brain, the part of the brain that's essential for your ability to pause, manage your emotions, think ahead, think critically, focus, ask questions, have the patience to ask questions or do a follow-up, reflect. It does all these superpower moves. But once that amygdala is activated, all that gets reversed. So the blood flow gets reversed. So when you learn these strategies to manage what comes up for you, not just you, Michelle, what comes up as a result of bias, then you can be aware in the moment on what to use as a strategy in the moment, because you can't change what you're not aware of, right? And you start putting all these things together, like, oh, I feel something triggered. I'm getting irritated, upset. And that's associated with your amygdala activation. That's associated with stress hormone. That's associated with reverse blood flow, right? You start making, and I'm saying all these things, but you can say the things too and think these steps automatically once you start to practice it, once you're aware of what is happening, the domino effect. And if you want to get your brain back, if you want to get your higher thinking abilities back, you have a tool to do that in the moment. And that's one way we'll be able to absorb and redirect all that is coming into our mental feeds and affecting our thinking abilities, our emotions, our decisions, because it is overwhelming. So I'm going to share a few more things as well on that. That's a great question, needed one, which is absolutely. It's a perfect question, actually, because I said that, what was it? 10, 15 slides ago. And it's like we ruminate on things, right? And that's kind of how bias works as well, right? Like when we have on the receiving end of a bias act or decision, we're going to sit with that. We're going to ruminate. We're going to think about, well, why did that happen? Why didn't I get the position? I think I know why, but I can't prove it. You know, it's taking up what? Mental resources. And I also said earlier that one of the points of bias in the brain is to be more efficient with our mental energy. And so when we are dealing with negative bias, intentional bias, or people who haven't checked their bias, then it affects us mentally. It affects our mental resources. Now we have to deal with this rumination. Now we have to think of trying to figure out why, when we may never figure out why. And so that detracts from our ability to be efficient, to show up fully for our clients, right? To not make as many mistakes, because if your amygdala is activated, if you have more stress, that affects your performance. It affects your ability to focus. It affects your mood. See, the domino effect again. You all have the capability of mentally walking through these steps in the moment. That's what's so empowering about understanding the brain. And it's needed, especially now. So the dynamics of the brain, I'll say this too, because it's important. The speed at which the brain operates is on a whole different plane than how we operate externally. Like me just talking to you, answering your question, my brain already responded before it even came to my conscious brain, the prefrontal cortex. Okay, it operates in milliseconds, sometimes shorter, based on decisions, which is also important in what neuroscience has shown, that we make decisions subconsciously before it reaches our subconscious. But there is a half a millisecond where we can actually stop ourselves from saying the thing, doing the thing, or making that decision. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot of time, but when we talk about as it relates to the speed of the brain, it's plenty of time to exercise what I teach my students, the veto method. Like you can veto your decision, your mood, or what you're going to say just before you say it, because there's enough time in that half a second to catch yourself. And the more you exercise that veto power, the more you can navigate what comes up for you when you experience bias. And not just when you experience bias, but when you have a conflict within yourself when presented with information that may conflict with self. You see?
Fascinating.
Yes, that's a great question. You can see why I needed 90 minutes. Thanks, Carlene. Okay, let's see. I just want to point out that we evolved. There's a reason. Now, this is if you believe in evolution. I just say the things where people are culturally. Okay, some people, have different beliefs of how we got started. What we all can agree on is that you can think about human evolution from a physical point of view, or you could think about it in a figurative point of view, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, or humanity. How about that? So when I talk about evolution, I'm really going to that deeper part of our humanity. Okay, we evolved our humanity by being a collective, by working together, by having different ideas and different opinions and different strengths, different backgrounds that everyone contributed to so we can survive and thrive. How about that? That's new. I'm neutral. I'm reframing. I'm gonna have you all doing that later. All right. And research studies have shown it. This is nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun, really. It is us who have changed what the collective means, okay? And if we are going to thrive, we need to do it in a collective way that is diverse. This is how we've always operated. This is how species always have operated. So when someone can understand bias as inherent, that everyone is biased, but everyone is not fair when it comes to their bias, right? And then you help them to understand the importance of diversity, even if you have to use another species to do it. Now they can wrap their minds around the importance of diversity. Now they're not as triggered when we talk about biases, right? People are not going to learn from you if in a heightened state of threat and fear. So we have to neutralize it, or that amygdala will prevent the learning process. They won't even be able to receive you. You won't even be able to have a conversation, okay? A productive conversation. And so these are all happening at the level of the brain that needs to be addressed, that will become more second nature the more we implement and practice. All right. And just to reference that Harvard Business Review research, they were able to show, and I'll put the reference for Curleen to also include in the packet, that when there was more diversity, I'm talking about different backgrounds, different ethnicities, and gender, there was more innovation, there was more creativity, and the quality of decisions were compared to the other groups that were not as diverse, were more quality, and the number of solutions that they came up with was exponentially more. Now, this is important because we were having a discussion pre-call, and what came up for me when this statement was made around how do we need to strategize, just referencing how the Supreme Court struck down our civil rights voting, backtracking, right? And in my mind, and maybe I said it out loud, but I think I said that we need new strategies, we need new insights. And so the connection with diversity is because history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And we're going to be swimming in uncharted territory. That means we need our mental faculties to be able to make better decisions, have better insights, and imagine a new way of navigating this current agenda, but also reimagining what it means to be a democracy, what it means to hold people accountable for the law, what it means to advocate for our clients, for our families, for our communities in this climate. Okay, and diversity can do that because, number one, we've been doing that, right? Species have been doing that, and we have research that shows that quality of decisions are improved, your innovation, your insights, the number of solutions you come up with, the number of solutions you can imagine, all improve with diversity. So we're going to, in order to navigate this time, we need diverse groups, we need diverse thinkers, we need diverse backgrounds, because that's how we're going to navigate out of this, in addition to regulating ourselves in the face of negative bias, intentional biases, whether we're receiving it or giving it. All right. So I'm going to leave this slide. It's just a comparison to nature and the idea of what happens when diversity is affected and the organizational parallel. And if we keep ignoring diversity, if we keep just dealing with the surface, the tip, and never dealing with the layers, okay? We're all biased. It starts out young. It starts out with programming, depending on the culture as well. The culture could be more intentional about ensuring that there is negative bias, stereotypes, right? But there's also neutral biases. It's just our brains trying to create or understand the world around us as fast as possible so we don't have to keep making the same decisions. Like, who's my mom? do I like this person? Is this person important to me? Yes, it's your grandma, So it is our brain's natural mechanisms to create shortcuts so that we can be more efficient with the brain and make decisions faster so we can think on other things and be more creative on other things and be more innovative, because we would use up all of our mental energy rehashing decisions and we would never create and innovate. You see the link? The brain is very wise. All right. And it's also an energy hungry beast. Okay. So it's going to be biased. It's going to make shortcuts. It has shortcuts, but we have to be mindful of how it affects us. Okay. So reframing, that is a strategy to help regulate your nervous system, your amygdala, your prefrontal cortex. You want your prefrontal cortex online, right? But if you are triggered or receive bias, you're going to feel some kind of way, and everyone has to reflect on how does this affect me. And that is at the individual level, because everyone's baseline of threat is different, of fear is different. And so it does take work to deal with those layers. It does take time. We can't be busy all the time. And I'm going to throw this in there. We can't be consuming all the time. We are not starving for information. We are starving for the deeper reflection on that information, the ability to process that information, how to connect that information. So if we're always consuming, and I mean the scrolling and the short clips and the TikToks and the Instagrams, all of that is just overwhelming our neurons. And that contributes to part of the stress, the disorientation, the irritation. And so we can't attribute it all to this era of engineered chaos and overwhelm, because on some level, and this is just a theory, they already know how to overwhelm the mind. It's a war tactic. Shock and awe. That is a war strategy, people. Okay. And if you have people who understand the mind, they can use it for certain reasons. Okay. So I'm just going to throw that out there. But we have agency. That will also reclaim your nervous system, people. When you say, no, I may not have control over some things, but I have control over what I allow into my mental feed. I have control over whether I'm going to take some time for myself and reflect and just be quiet and think and not take in and consume, right? So the brain also likes feeling in control, because when we don't feel like we're in control, let me put it to in your profession. So if you have employees who feel like they're being micromanaged, or people take over their projects or take credit for their projects, that can feel like they don't have control or a sense of agency over their projects, over their profession, over their career. Okay, and that will turn on the amygdala activation as well, which then you can go down the mental domino effects, right? But you can also do that in your everyday life. If we don't feel like we have control over what's going on in the world, because there's a lot going on in the world, the one way to take back your agency and to decrease that amygdala that's probably on hyperdrive unconsciously, is to reflect in the moment when you start to feel it come up, feeling tension, having negative thoughts. It can manifest in so many ways, people's stress. That's why I say it's individual, right? You have to sit with it and see what happens when you are under stress. Once you are able to realize that you are feeling a particular way, irritated, snappy, even, craving sweets, right? Everybody shows up differently. You can pause and say, okay, what may be causing this in this moment? And maybe you have the news on in the background and something is happening, right? And maybe it is something that is putting you in distress, but it's also something you don't have control over. Once you put it into the perspective, like, I can't control that, but I have control over these other things. And you start giving yourself a list of things you can control, even in the moment. In the moment is better a lot of times. You then decrease that activation of your amygdala and then the stress levels. And then you get out of the sympathetic nervous system, which is your survival nervous part of the nervous system, the flight or flee or fawn or freeze mode. You want to get out of that mode and get into your parasympathetic nervous system, which is coming from a calm centeredness with the endorphins that will help fuel your body and your higher parts of your brain. All right. So that was actually a strategy right there. It doesn't sound like it, but I'm always infusing strategies if you listen to the nuances of what I'm saying. So having the sense of autonomy and control is a neurophysiological strategy. And then you can go down the rabbit hole for that. All right. We need to understand the differences on where we have been trying to fix bias and diversity. Okay. There is a difference. Remember, I'm always talking from the lens of the brain. I can't help it. It's a blessing and a curse sometimes. More a blessing. But all these decades, we've been fighting unconscious bias, negative. We've been fighting the right to have equity, equality, right? Diversity. Just the energy of that word. You're in fight mode, right? Or what about fix? We're always trying to fix this overwhelming system that the foundation was, not the strongest and hasn't been fixed in a long time, or a lot of parts have not been recognized in a substantial way to be able to fix the systems, right? And so we can get into a more powerful state of flow and cognitive flexibility to be able to navigate these issues, especially during this time, okay? So fight versus fix. Maybe it's time to move into flow and flex, all right? Because when we're thinking about the term fight, we have to activate our threat brain. You're in fight mode, right? And a lot of times when we're fighting, we're being reactive to something that's wronged us or wronged others. I know you all are advocates for diversity. So you almost have to stay in a fight mode to advocate, to, react, be on guard to make sure people are not experiencing something unfair. You see where I'm going with this? Fix. It has that fixed mindset energy when you try to fix things, right? You're always fixing something that's broken. Okay, so our minds are always going towards, how do I fix something versus how do I create a new way of thinking, a new way of policy? Maybe that doesn't even have anything to do with that particular broken policy, right? And so our minds are in fix-it mode, fix-it energy. And a lot of times it can restrict the resources to your whole brain resources because you are thinking of one particular thing to fix. All right. But flow is different because flow uses the whole brain. Flow is when you are operating in your strengths, but it's still challenging. And flow is deeper than, once again, flow is an iceberg as well, people. So when we're in flow, not only are we challenged and using our strengths, but we are learning new ways of optimizing our strengths that can lead to insight. It leads to fulfillment because it's draining always fighting and fixing. And you feel like you're not moving the needle. And so you lose morale, you lose motivation, you lose inspiration, right? It's hard to stay above emotional water when you're always fighting and fixing. But in flow, you are still using your strengths as an advocate, as a justice warrior, for your clients and trying to help navigate the moment. But you're doing it from a flow state, which is a whole different cocktail of neurochemicals that is fueling your whole brain and giving you access to your whole brain and allowing for you to tap into sometimes what's called gamma waves, which leads to insights that you haven't thought of before. And when we are able to, a pop-up came up, when we are able to not just stay in flow, because I know that sounds woo-woo to some, like a soft skill, but it's really powerful. We can balance that as well. Yes, have access to your whole brain, but also when we have cognitive flexibility, that is when we can incorporate the strategies to navigate our physiology or the moments of challenge when it has to do with bias. Okay, so we want to move in. I invite everyone to consider moving from fight and fix bias, fight and fix diversity inequities, to flow and flex, to deal with these issues, reimagine these issues, and re-strategize on how we are going to navigate diversity and bias, negative bias outcomes. Okay? That's something I know that you all have to sit with a lot of what I have shared today, because I know it's a lot. So let me give you an analogy, because analogies, we remember our analogies. Our brains are built for analogies and symbols and everything more than words. So what happens when someone tries to drown? Or they don't try to drown. What happens when people drown? They start to panic. They start to pull on anything they can to save themselves. You can imagine their amygdala is activated. They're in complete survival mode, right? And so their thinking is off, right? Their higher brain thinking to navigate the moment, like just pause and float on your back. That can give you some time to figure out your next move, right? And so think of fixing and fighting as drowning, right? You're being reactive to the moment. You're not able to expand how you can navigate the moment. But if you're in flow, right? You're on your back. You're floating on your back. You got some time, some reversal of that blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. Now you can think through. You can start thinking about your strengths, and your right brain comes online. Your whole brain comes online. You might get some insights, some gamma waves. You might access a memory where you've seen a show and they did something when they were in the middle of the ocean or the river and they did the thing to survive. You can't access all that if you are struggling to survive. And if somebody's with the person who's drowning or trying to save them, they're going to try to pull them down as well. So everybody's going down. So this is just an illustration from going from fight to flow, and the access you get from your brain when you make that transition of mental states. Okay. And how you operate and navigate bias and diversity. Are you all receiving this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What are the attendees saying? Because I know it's a lot. Oh, it's a lot. I'm a lot.
So there is a question. What is the single most surprising thing brain science has revealed about bias that you think the legal profession urgently needs to hear?
That we haven't been addressing it in the right way. That people don't understand the mechanics of bias, the necessity of bias. And if people don't understand the necessity of bias, then they will be reactive. They won't be able to receive why diversity is then important. They won't be able to receive the bias trainings because they already have a negative association with the term bias, not understanding it is a biological necessary mechanism that is there for mental efficiency. And the more efficient we can be using our mental resources, our brain resources, the more we can be more understanding of others and be less reactive, be more inclusive, to see the humanity in others, to work collectively with others, and to be able to hear the facts. And even if it's unfair with or in conflict with our own biases or perceptions, we can still be fair. So putting this together from a neuroscience point of view, with real culture, with real problems associated with bias and diversity in these organizations, we can understand that once you understand the brain, then you can navigate diversity, then you can navigate biases. And we need to stop trying to change biases. We need to stop trying to change. We need to stop trying to eliminate bias, because that should not be the goal. Understanding of bias is the goal, and learning to be fair, even in the face of one's own bias, is the direction that we need to go.
I have another question that came up. So, with all of that being said, how do you recommend attorneys approach conversations with colleagues or partners whose bias they observe affecting clients or firm culture, especially when there's a power differential?
Okay, is that person still online? Still present?
Yes.
I would
Yes.
like to know a specific, without naming a person or revealing identity, obviously, but give me a specific scenario where that is true or where you
Okay.
encountered it. Let's
So
drill
it was
it down in real time.
let me give you a hypo and see if that can assist.
Okay.
I'm from rural Louisiana. Well, I work in rural Louisiana, and sometimes there are clients that come in with a certain bias / preference, and they might not want a woman. They might not want a woman that looks a certain way, and they'll talk, and then they choose someone else, or it just. Or
Okay,
sometimes
that's
you're in
great.
court. Okay.
So my follow-up question to you would be, how do you know? Are they using certain words? Are they using body language? Have they had a pattern of saying as much? Did you hear from someone else? Like, what is your conclusion that would be their preference or bias?
Because the area I live in is very small, so we kind of know everybody, and so you kind of know how people live. and what their usual conversation is. And
Okay, thank you, thank you. So if there is a pattern of this person preferring a certain person, and they come into your organization, so one way to not act, not you in particular, but anyone, to not be reactive to that particular person, right, is to know that, is to know how you react in those type of situations, right? Because if we haven't done the work, it could be triggering, and you could exacerbate the situation or however you're going to respond. But if you have regulated, if your baseline of your nervous system is already regulated, and you already expect this person to come in with this in mind, maybe beforehand you consult with your team and say, hey, we're going to have this client come in, and they have this pattern of A, B, and C. How are we going to deal with it? And how are we going to show a strong front? And so that's one way to be proactive, right? To get ahead of it, especially if you already know who's coming through that door, right? So your prefrontal cortex is already online. It's already prepared. So when the brain has certainty, when it has, if it knows what to expect, it can navigate the moment better. And when you are consulting with your partners, you all come up with a strategy, right? Or you can even come up with questions that that will kind of cajole the person to reveal themselves. Like, now, you can't say this stuff in just in private or in other situations. You ask the question in real time and force them, in a sense, to reveal their bias. Because do you really want to deal with someone who is sexist, who is racist, who is ableist? Is that the type of energy we want in this organization? Is that a part of our mission, right? Are we valuing the dollar over humanity, right? So there are a few ways and different levels to navigate, because we're at a time when not enough people are speaking up, and we're kind of going with the status quo on some things, right? And in order to dismantle it, we have to get proactive and understand who we're willing to let in our realm of influence. We need to, let's say, rewrite the policies, rewrite, how we show up as organizations, as businesses, as community leaders. But there is power in asking questions, because even if they do reveal that they have this bias, this negative bias, right? You can follow up. Maybe they're not so blatant. Maybe they say, I don't think women are as smart as men. Let's just to be simple. Or I don't believe women are as polished, or Black women are not as polished. Let's just say that. And then you can ask another question back. Your curious mind is going, okay? Well, what would your definition of smart be? What would your definition of polish look like? How many women have you worked with in the past versus men? Because that tells a story too, right? If you only work with one group, how would you even know? That means you got your information from someone else that was negatively biased, or maybe you listened to or watched some things that skew your view of people. So you are in the moment, through asking curious questions, allowing them to reveal to themselves where their bias may be coming from. And so when we get curious about, this is another bonus, y'all. When we get curiouser about other people, that actually bonds us, because people want to know that you are interested in them. That's part of feeling like you care when you ask questions about them. So we don't always have to be on the answer part of the side. We can be on the curious part of the side and just keep asking questions. And that's a way to also deactivate their amygdala. That's another strategy for you people. I'm sure we're out of time or almost out of time, but
we are. Thank you so much, Shonté. This has been a really enlightening and fascinating discussion.
oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Obviously, I have more I can talk about, but I think you all get the gist, the picture, that there is more to this bias story, this diversity story, and more to this human experience. And I thank you all for listening, and I hope this serves you and gave you value today.
Truly, reframing, thinking about diversity and promoting neutralizing bias and focusing on fairness. I feel like we got to steal. I'm so grateful that you shared your time and your expertise, and it was truly brilliant. Thank you very much. It's deeply appreciated. And I know that the knowledge you shared was immensely beneficial to us as lawyers, and more importantly, us as human beings. I'd also, again, like to thank the moderators, Pamela Harper Hall and Michelle Mapp, for moderating this conversation. You did an excellent job, and we're grateful for your work. I'd like to also thank once again our chair, the chair of the division, Mel Shaw, and the chair of the diversity board, Benis Aldana, the Honorable Benis Aldana, for really supporting our work and allowing us the opportunity to speak about bias. And I know we can continue this conversation through the work that the division and the diversity board is doing. And finally, we'd like to thank Joan M. Swartz, Managing Attorney of the Law Offices of Joan M. Swartz, for sponsoring this program. We truly appreciate your sponsorship. And thank you to all the attendees. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your engagement. And if you're interested in learning more about this, join the Diversity Board and, or as Mel Shaw indicated in the beginning, the division. And so this is what we do. This is the heart and fabric of the division. It's not something that we talk about. It's something that we do and practice. And so as we come to a close, I prompted in the beginning, I hope you remember that we typically end this series or these program series with a charge. And that charge is, I will activate diversity by. So if you have a tangible way that you'll activate diversity going forward, we don't want to just talk about it, we want to be about it, please let us know in the Q&A box. And as we think about that, I'll also, I don't know if our moderators want to share, or I can share, or if any of our chairs present or our sponsor wants to share ways that they will activate diversity. I'll go ahead and lead the charge while y'all think about that. I will activate diversity by intentionally practicing resilience. I will use my agency to reframe unfair bias and promote fairness in my spheres of influence and the organizations of which I'm a part of. So that's one way that I'll activate diversity after today's programming.
And I will activate diversity by discussing the brain behind bias in my professional and personal networks.
Excellent.
And I will activate diversity by remembering the content that I learned here today as I meet with my clients who come from various walks of life, and being intentional as much as I can in supporting those who look to leadership roles, not only in national and state bar organizations, but also in my local community.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Shaw. We appreciate that. I think that's it. We'll leave you to the rest of your day. Thank you again, and thank you to everyone for participating.